Okay, so far as we've talked about non-infectious causes of reduced reproductive performance, we've talked about cystic ovarian disease and estrus in cattle. We're going to move on now to a range of other conditions that can affect reproductive performance. The calving interval, heat detection practices, body condition, score and nutrition. We've talked a little bit about this already. Heifer live weights, insemination practices. Again, we've talked about this in the AI lecture, but we'll just mention it again. And a little bit about bull management and fertility and herd structure. Then we'll move on to some other aspects in some future discussion. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to explain how calving to breeding interval can affect conception rates and how to manage a herd to increase the calving to breeding interval while still maintaining a 12-month intercalving interval, which is quite important for most farmers. You should be able to explain how heat detection, body weight, reproductive tract score, herd age, structure, bull power and insemination practices can affect fertility. You should be aware of the recommendations for body condition score at the time of mating and calving in a dairy herd and the maximum amount of body condition score that is recommended following calving. You should be able to make recommendations in regards to how many bulls should be placed with a herd at the start of mating and be able to recommend management practices which can assist with optimizing reproductive performance. First one we want to look at is calving interval and its effect on conception rates. The interval between calving and breeding has a significant effect on pregnancy rates. It's usually important on most farms to maintain a 12-month intercalving interval or not to go too far over 12 months. In order to do that, because cows have a approximately 9-month gestation length, they really only have about 80 days following calving in which to get pregnant in. So during that time the uterus has to repair itself, they have to start cycling and ovulating, and then they have to get pregnant within that 80-day window. What we do find is the longer cows have been calved following calving, the more fertile they are. Usually what happens is that pregnancy rates are quite low, less than 30 days. Based on the data that I've collected, that pregnancy rates at about 30 days are in the order of approximately 10%, pretty low. The reason for the low pregnancy rates in this area here, less than 30 days, is because the uterus is still repairing itself following calving, and the lining of the endometrium of the uterus has to be re-epithelialized. That is, it has to be repaired, and a new lining of tissue has to be formed. This often takes about 30 days in the cow. They also have to get rid of any infection that they may have acquired following calving or at the time of calving. Once cows get to about 40 days, pregnancy rates are increasing quite a lot. They're not too bad, but they tend to be optimal around 60 to 80 days in this period out here following calving. So by the time we start mating, if most of our cows are within this window, 60 to 80 days post-calving, then that's one way of improving reproductive performance in the herd. How to optimize the calving to breeding interval, and as I mentioned, the aim is really to increase the proportion of cows within the herd that have been calved 60 to 80 days at the timing when breeding commences. Now, this is not easy to achieve. In some dairy herds, what they'll undertake strategic calving induction of late calving cows. So cows that they know got pregnant late in the season and they're going to calve too late in the following season, sometimes they'll go ahead and induce parturition in those cows. If the calves are more than 2 weeks from their due date, then you will get mortalities in calves. And there's a set of guidelines which I won't go into here, that are available for farmers, and what they need to do is they need to care for those cows and those calves, and usually they'll have to euthanize calves that are born too premature. This practice is not recommended, and it's discouraged, in fact. But on some properties it is a balance between, if the cow is calving too late, it means that she basically has to go to the abattoirs, or she can be induced to calve, and that will preserve her life and help her to get in calf earlier the following year. So it's kind of a balancing act, but there are some welfare aspects associated with it, and the number of herds that practice this technique now is probably reducing as time goes on. We can also synchronise estrus at the start of the mating season to try to increase the number of cows that get pregnant in the first week of the breeding season. And by doing this, if we get a lot pregnant in the first week, then quite a few will calve early on, and they'll have more time to recover post-calving before they have to be bred again. Alternatively, late calving cows can be left out of the breeding program and bred later in the year when they've had more time to regain optimal fertility. And this is the principle that underlies the use of split calving herds in dairy herds. So these are herds where you're mating at, say, two different times of the year. So you might mate one herd in the autumn and another herd in the spring. And so if a cow's due to be mated in the autumn but she's calving too late, then she can calve, and then you may go ahead and breed her, not in the autumn but in the spring. But this doesn't suit every farm or every environment, so it's only really appropriate where you've got a split calving herd. If you're going to buy pregnant cows, then it pays to buy cows that are going to calve at the time that you want them to calve, so that they'll be ready to mate again at the appropriate time. If you actually buy pregnant cows and they calve late, you're actually purchasing a liability, and you basically that cow will be a late calver for the rest of her life, or she'll have a short productive life. So the message is, if you're going to buy pregnant animals, buy the ones that are going to calve at the time that you want them to calve. Otherwise it's going to cost you a lot more money. So that's we've just looked at the effect of calving interval on reproductive performance, and it has a big effect on reproductive performance, particularly in dairy herds. Let's look at just heat detection on reproductive performance. Obviously, if the breeding season has commenced and you fail to detect cows in heat, then those cows don't get an opportunity to get pregnant, and then you won't get another opportunity to breed that cow probably for another 3 weeks. So she'll be 3 weeks later than what you anticipated. So in herds where a lot of cows are detected in heat at the right time, and they're detected in heat accurately, then that will improve reproductive performance. This graph here shows you the relationship between the three-week submission rate and the heat detection rate. It's just saying that the 3-week submission rate is the percentage of cows that are submitted for insemination within the first 3 weeks of the breeding season, and the heat detection rate. So herds that are submitting a lot of cows in the first 3 weeks of the breeding season, they're detecting most of those cows in heat. So high submission rates, usually good heat detection rates. This of course could be a false representation of what's happening. If, for example, farmers are not detecting heat accurately, but they're still submitting a lot of cows, then you'd get a different relationship. For example, I heard of one case in one herd where the farmer was actually paying the workers extra money if they picked cows that were in heat. The problem with that situation is that they start picking cows that are not in heat and saying that they're in heat, and then of course those cows won't get pregnant when you inseminate them. So that's kind of the opposite extreme end of the system, where yes, you want to detect cows in heat, but you want to make sure that it's accurate, that those cows actually are in heat. Now if we look at the heat detection rate and the 6-week in calf rate, which is the percentage of cows that get pregnant in the first 6 weeks of the breeding season, you can see as you detect more heat, more cows in heat, your 6-week in calf rate starts to go up. So if you want to optimize your reproductive performance in your herd, you need to have good heat detection rates. And that's kind of stating the obvious, really, because if cows are not detected in heat, then they're not going to be inseminated and they're not going to get a chance to get pregnant. So the message is, as the heat detection rate improves, the percentage of cows that are submitted for AI increases, and the percentage of cows that become pregnant within the first 6 weeks of the start of mating also increases. Just look at loss of body condition post-calving. We mentioned this previously, but if cows lose a lot of body weight following calving, then that will reduce reproductive performance. It sends a strong message to the reproductive system to shut down, or it's not in the best interests of the cow to get pregnant if they're losing body condition. If they're losing a lot of body condition score following calving, this will increase the interval from calving to first ovulation. It'll decrease conception rates when they're inseminated or naturally bred, and it'll increase embryonic loss rates. So again, following calving, it's important that cows receive adequate levels of nutrition. Otherwise, you're going to get a delay in conception and an increase in early embryonic loss rates and a reduction in conception rates. This is just illustrating a little bit of that information. If you look at cows that are kind of have lost the cows that are in body condition score at calving, so the condition they're in at the time of calving, if it was less than 4.5 on a 1 to 8 scale, then the pregnancy rates were 58%, and if they were between the 4.5 and the 5.5 kind of mark, pregnancy rates were 69% at the end of 6 weeks of mating. If they were too fat, there was a slight reduction in pregnancy rates. So the message here is basically you want cows in good condition at the time of calving to optimize their pregnancy rates early in the breeding season. Let's look at body condition score change during early lactation. So if they lost a lot of body condition score following calving, their pregnancy rates tended to be lower than those that lost less body condition score following calving. This is another study where we're looking at 3 different types of animals. Cows that lose a little bit of body condition score and compared to cows that lose a lot of body condition score, 1 body condition score following calving. So if you look at herd the cows categorized as C that have lost a lot of body condition score, the mean days to first ovulation are longer, the mean days to the first observed estrus are longer, the mean days to the first service are longer, and the mean first service pregnancy rate or conception rate is quite a lot lower in the cows that lost 1 or more body condition score units following calving. And the mean services per conception, the number of inseminations they needed to get pregnant, was higher compared to those that lost less body condition score. And remember, the target that we're looking for is we want cows to lose less than half a condition score in body condition following calving if possible. This is just a little bit of data from some herds that I worked with. There's 5 herds here. Looking at their average body condition score, but this is, I condition scored these on a 1 to 5 scale, which is a system that's been developed in the USA, so not a 1 to 8 scale. I used a 1 to 5 scale here. You can see the average body condition score was variable across the herds. This one here was lowest. This herd here also had the highest percentage of anestrus cows. 35% of the herd were anestrus. And cows that were below a critical body condition score of less than 2.5, so cows that were quite skinny, virtually half the herd were what I would have classified as seriously skinny. All I'm trying to illustrate here is that if you've got a lot of undernourished cows in your herd, then you're going to increase the percentage of anestrus cows in the herd. That will result in a delay in conception within those herds, within those cows, and you'll get a late calving. And that's what was happening in this herd. They had a very spread out calving pattern, and a lot of late calving cows, and that's principally because the cows were too undernourished and they weren't ovulating when it was time to breed them. So here are the recommended industry guidelines for dairy cows at various stages of their lactation. At calving, we want less than 15% of the herd to have a body condition score of 4.5 or less on a 1 to 8 scale. Less than 15% of cows should also be above a body condition score of 5.5. That is, we don't want cows too skinny, and we don't want them too fat or too many of them. Now, following calving, we don't want more than 15% of the herd to lose more than 1 body condition score. And the average decrease after calving is about half a body condition score on a 1 to 8 scale. So all cows will generally lose some weight following calving, but we don't want them to lose too much. During mating, we want them to maintain their body condition score or put on weight, and in late lactation we don't want cows under body condition score 4.5, somewhere usually between that and 5.5. And these are the general guidelines that we recommend for body condition score in dairy cows throughout lactation. This is just a bit of a reminder about what, on a 1 to 8 scale, some of the features are for cows between 4.5 and 5.5. Cows that are 5.5, the area between the pin bones and the hooks tends to be filled out a little bit, tends to be shallow compared to very deep in cows that are under body condition score 4. The area around the base of the tail should be filled out with some fat area, compared to cows that are quite skinny, where all the fat has disappeared from these areas, and they're very bony. There's not very rounded here, lots of prominent bones showing and prominent backbone. These ones are filled out with a bit of fat tissue, rounded pin bones as well. This is just some pictures. Cows that are condition score 4, can't quite see the backbone on this cow, but it would be a bumpy ridge if you looked at it from the side. A little bit of depression here, but not too bad, just a little bit of slight covering of fat over the pin bones and the base of the tail. This is the same, condition score 4 in a Jersey cow. Condition score 5, you see a little bit more filling out of this area here. The backbone tends to be flat now instead of a bumpy ridge, and this area between the pin bones and the hooks is more of a U-shaped rather than a V-shape. So these are cows in just reasonable body condition. You wouldn't call them fat, but they're just in nice condition. So here's some review questions for you to consider for this segment. So go ahead and pause the tape and see if you can answer these, and then we'll come back and discuss them in a moment. So what's the effects of the loss of body condition post-calving on fertility in cows? Well, the more weight that cows lose following calving will have a negative effect on fertility. It'll have a negative impact on the percentage of cows that are cycling, so cows will be more likely to be anestrous the more body weight they lose. They'll have a decrease in conception rates and an increase in early embryonic loss rates. The calving to conception intervals will increase, and you'll have a lower percentage of cows that will get pregnant within 6 weeks of the start of mating. The minimal loss in body condition in dairy cows that is recommended post-calving using a 1 to 8 scoring system is about half a body condition score. Officially it's less than 0.6, but it's a bit hard to remember, and half a body condition score, it's about right, and that's easier to remember. The time of calving, cows should be somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5, preferably between 5 and 5.5 on a 1 to 8 scale at the time of calving. How could you increase the percentage of cows within a seasonal calving dairy herd that have a calving interval of 40 to 80 days at the start of mating? Well, this requires quite a bit of management. We need to try and manage their body condition so that they have adequate body condition at the time of calving. We need to ensure that once they do calve, we provide them with adequate food so that they don't lose too much body condition score following calving, and so that they start cycling early in the mating period. So that way we can try to get them in calf as early as possible. You can undertake strategic calving induction. If cows are going to calve too late in the season, you can induce them to calve and get them to calve down early. And cows that are induced to calve, provided they've got enough time to recover, their fertility is actually very close to cows that haven't been induced to calve. So you can save quite a few cows with this technique, but it does have some welfare implications. If you're going to buy cows, again, buy cows that are going to calve at the time that you want them to calve. They're not late calving cows. You could also undertake synchronization of estrus to try to force ovulate cows in the first week of the mating period. And the following year, some of those cows that get pregnant in the first week, they should have a long period of recovery before they're due to be mated again. How are conception rates affected by the calving to mating interval? Generally, not many cows get pregnant under 30 days post-calving because the uterus is still in a state of repair. But between 30 and 80 days, there's a steady increase in pregnancy rates per week. And at optimum pregnancy rates, the graph tends to flatten out between about 60 to 80 days. After about 80 days, you don't tend to get much of an increase in pregnancy rates. And in fact, if you're looking at cows that, for example, have been calved 150 days or more, if they start getting too fat, then you can actually have a negative effect on pregnancy rates. So generally there's a steady increase in conception rates up to about 60 to 80 days, and then it levels off.